This is the first of what will be quite a few tutorials on Adobe Audition's multi-track feature. Multi-track sessions really are the heart and soul of Audition. Of course, you've been working with single files inside the waveform editor, and that's an important part too. But if you want to blend audio together, blend different instruments, vocalists, what have you, together, you do that in a multi-track session. So to follow along with this demo, just go get the 1201 multi-track demo session file by going to the working files multi-track session subfolder, and there it is. Double click on it, or click on it, click open. When you do that, it brings in 8 files, all 8 of which will be inside this multi-track session, where they're referred to as clips here inside a multi-track session. So what is a multi-track session? It is all these tracks in which clips reside. And you can have as many clips on a track as you care to have. And when clips are one above each other like this, then they blend together. And there are multiple ways to blend them together. But basically, if they're one above the other, then ultimately they will be blended together in some kind of pleasing mix. At least that's the goal, right? Now, these clips are all the same length. They don't have to be, but these clips were made in a recording session in Santa Rosa, California at Northern Lights Recording Studio. Northern Lights Recording right there at northernlightsrecording.com. If you want to find out more about them, visit their website. The recording studio is owned by this gentleman there in the left corner. His name is Barry Schiffman. Barry wrote the 2 songs that we've been working with in these tutorials. It just couldn't be that way and just too hard to find. And the vocalist we've been working with here all along is Laura Lee Christensen there. So thank you to both of them, plus some of the guys from this band and another band that contributed some of the instrumental work as well, although Barry did the preponderance of the instrumental work. So here we are back inside Audition looking at the tracks or the clips that were recorded in that session. Of course, it was multiple takes. Typically what happens is you lay down some rhythm instruments like a rhythm guitar or a bass and some drums, and then other instrumentalists or vocalists come in and then lay down their tracks by listening to the already recorded stuff. And that's how this was done at Barry's studio at Northern Lights Recording. So we have here 8 tracks from that 19-track session, and we've blended them all together, and it sounds something like this.
What I wanted, make this a lesson, honey, that you learn.
That isn't how they all sounded when I first put them inside a multi-track session. I did some stuff to improve the sound. And the first order of business that you can do when you put tracks in a multi-track session is to change their volume. So here I increased the volume of Laura Lee a little bit from the original recording, and I dropped the volume of the rhythm guitar and the organ. So that's just an example of how you can control an entire track. Now these controls here control the entire track, but in a clip, you can control volume and panning. Now we've controlled volume with a couple of effects over here. Amplitude and compression. You see we have those 2 effects that we worked with before called the fade envelope and the gain envelope. And they both have these so-called envelopes, these little lines that you can put keyframes on and change volume or change panning if you care to up or down like that, left and right. I'll undo that by going Control or Command Z and we'll get that taken care of. And you can also control volume and panning for an entire track. Here it's within a clip, but then down below here you can open up the track controls as well and control the panning and volume that way. So here it's the whole track. It's all been raised by that amount, but I can control it more subtly down the line by just adjusting the clip or the track with keyframes as well. Sometimes you do panning to place instruments on the stage. So for example, the guitar here, I've panned to the left about 30. So it's about a third of the way to left of center. If I solo it by pressing the S key, you can hear that coming out sort of the left ear a little bit more than the right ear if you've got a headset on. Just a little bit toward the left. You can see it in the VU meter here. It'll be, the left-hand side will be a little taller. Something like that. Let me just unsolo that one. If you look down a little bit farther, you'll see what I did with the organ. We had the organ have 2 outputs, left and right, to kind of spread it out a little bit. So we don't put the left channel or the left side of the organ way off to the left and the right side way off to the right. We place the organ on the stage. So you take the right output from the organ a little bit farther to the right than the left output. So you see the right output's about 50. So if you think of this being the center of the stage, then 50 is about here, and then 30 is about here. So we spread the sound of the organ out and tried to give it some more breadth and width. So I'll solo those 2 and you can hear how that works. Sounds like we're at a hockey game. Anyway, that's how that works. We got that whole instrument pushed off to the right side of the stage a bit, but we give it some breadth because we have a left and a right channel coming out of that. The bass is center, which is where a bass is normally located. You can tell it's center there. It's 3 drum tracks here, and we've got them all centered up, but we've got a left drum track from the trap set and the right drum track to the trap set, so we got them a little left of center, a little right of center, and then the snare drum in the center. I'll solo those 3, like so. So rather than have them coming out dead center, kind of spread them out a little bit to give the drum a little breadth or width as well. So not only can we control the volume for all the tracks and the panning for all the tracks, we can control what's called the routing. We can send tracks to buses or output them to buses. Now if you look here, there's a little arrow pointing to the left. That's the output for each track. Where's it going to go? Ultimately, the tracks have to go to the master for you to hear them and for you to then mix this down to a mono, stereo, or 5.1 surround sound file. So they eventually have to get to the master track, which is way at the bottom here. There's the master track. And you can see the VU meter work on the master track. Eventually everybody gets there. It's combined into the stereo signal, in this case, in the master track. But sometimes they take little detours along the way. And so, for instance, the organ left and the organ right, I have it going to what's called an organ bus. It's being output to an organ bus. And a bus is just a separate track that has no clips in it. You can't put clips in it, but you can use it to control things. So if I go down to the organ bus, for example, you can tell the bus tracks are this kind of green. And the organ bus, if I click on this effects button, you'll see that it has a studio reverb on it. So rather than put reverb on 2 tracks, which causes the system to slow down a little bit more, I can put it on 1, and I can control it for both tracks equally right here inside the bus. So that's an advantage. And then if I go back to the output, you see that the bus now goes to the master. So it's kind of a little detour along the way. It's another kind of detour as well. It's called a send. So I'll go down to the drums. I'll open up this little button here which shows you the sends. And the sends allow you to also route things for good reason, to try to take advantage of, putting one effect on multiple tracks. So here I've got the drums going to a compression bus down here. And in the compression bus, I have one effect, compression effect. If I solo the compression bus, you hear the sound that it makes when it's compressing the sound. I have different sends for the drums as well, so I can control them. I have a different send. I'll click on that. And I have a send that's also for reverb. So each drum set is going to a reverb send. So I can control the effects much more directly in terms of when they're all going to one spot, I can control the reverb here for them all by clicking on effects, opening up the reverb, and playing with that. Instead of having it on 3 tracks, I have it on just 1 here. I can make it dry or make it much more reverb like this. And that's all done inside 1 bus track. And then that bus track, actually they call it a send, but still it's a bus track. If I look at the output for that, it goes eventually to the master as well. So everybody eventually makes its way to the master track. Let me turn off that little solo so that these guys are no longer grayed out like that. There we go. Okay. Each track also has what's called an EQ on it. This is the parametric equalizer or the parametric EQ. We've seen that as a separate effect, but it's so commonly used that they let you use it right here inside each track. If you just double click on this, it opens up the EQ, which you've seen before. It looks exactly like the parametric EQ. It's nice that every track has one of these things instead of having you go and load up an effect. It just sits here kind of in the holding pattern waiting for you to use it. I'll turn that off right now. And you've seen the effects before. You've seen how when you work in the effects rack, whatever you work in the effects rack also shows up here when you click on the effects button for each of these tracks. So every track can have its own set of effects. And as I showed you before, the bus tracks have their own effects too. Finally, when you create a multi-track session, also work on that multi-track session in the mixer. Looks very much like a hardware mixer you'd see inside a production studio, and has these sliders, which are more ergonomic when you're trying to control volume than using envelopes. So some people prefer working with the sliders, and you can move the sliders in real time, and then that records the keyframes as you move the sliders. So that's one advantage of working inside the mixer. You can also access the sends and the effects and the outputs as well here inside the mixer. It kind of duplicates what goes on inside a multi-track session, but for many people, this sort of ergonomic approach to mixing audio is just a little more comfortable than working inside a multi-track session. You can see that you can access all the tracks here to the right, with green being the buses. So let me go back to the multi-track session and just kind of show you that one more time. So that's a basic look at a multi-track session. You can see there's a lot to it. I'm going to walk you through how to set them up and how to arrange clips on them and put effects on them and do the sends and the outputs and all that kind of stuff in upcoming tutorials.